All right, 4:31. Going to call the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Dorothy, would you please take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Bob Waller. Garrett Harmon.
Here.
Don Barnett.
Here.
Michael Siegerman.
Here.
Rustin Zuger.
Here.
David Jones.
Here.
Marty Leonard. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dorothy. Okay, first item on the agenda is a Visitor Citizens Forum. So any person with business that's not scheduled on the agenda is encouraged to briefly speak to the commission. Please fill out the speaker request form and give it to the commission secretary prior to the meeting. The number of speakers will be limited to the first 10 speakers, and each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. No formal action can be taken on these items, as the Open Meetings Act requires formal action items be posted on an agenda no later than 72 hours before the meeting. If formal action is required, the items will be placed on an agenda for a future meeting. So is anyone wanting to speak on an item that's not on the agenda? Okay. Item number 2, consent agenda. All items listed below on the consent agenda are considered routine or ministerial in nature and will be enacted with one motion. There will be no separate discussion of items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. We have minutes from the February 15th meeting as item 2A. I had noticed one change on item 2A. The call to order was by Commissioner Harmon. Commissioner Waller wasn't present. That was the only change I noticed. Commissioners, did y'all see anything else? So I have a motion on item 2A for minutes of February 15th.
I'll make a motion. Minutes are approved with the change.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve minutes of February 15th with the change from the call to order. All in favor, raise your right hand. Passes 5-0. Item 2B is approval of the minutes from the March 1st meeting. Commissioners, any adjustments to that? If not, I can take a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
I'll second.
Got a motion and a second to approve minutes as presented. All in favor, raise your right hand. Passes 5-0. Right. Item number 3A on the agenda. It's a public hearing, consideration and action on a recommendation to the City Council for annexation and zoning. Sabina?
Thank you. Good evening. This item comes before you. If you'll recall, about a month ago, this commission had a preliminary plat that came before you for this same property, which is Comanche Trace, Section 15. I do have a better location map here. This is the location map that's in your packet for the purposes of showing the area, the immediate area adjacent to Comanche Trace, Section 13. I'm not exactly sure what happened with Section 14, but it jumps from 13 to 14. So, but this is a map that is actually not in your staff report. It shows you better where Section 15 is, and you'll see in the blue line that's where the city limit line currently ends. We are annexing Comanche Trace section by section into the city limits as per the development agreement that was signed between the city and the developer about 19 years ago now. So as these properties come in for platting, they are also coming into the city limits. So you've probably seen several of these in the past, and this This is a further, a further section of that. The Plan Development District, as you know, is more specific in that a plan is actually attached to the zoning as it goes forward and gets approved. So the preliminary plat that you have approved, it will be attached and will be a condition of zoning, if you will, as the properties come forward for permitting then in the future once the property is within the city limits. There is a fairly extensive annexation process, even if it is a voluntary, which all of our annexations are for the most part voluntary, especially in the Comanche Trace development, they are all voluntary, but it's still, the statute still requires two public hearings at the city council level and then 2 readings at the city council level. So this is the beginning of that process, and we will forward your recommendation then to the city council. And so we do recommend approval of the Plan Development District zoning of this property upon, that will be in effect upon annexation. That's all I have on this one.
Okay. So this requires a public hearing. So at 4:37, I'd like to open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak on this agenda item? Seeing no one come forward, I close the public hearing at 4:38. And commissioners, do you have any questions or concerns on this item?
Understood.
Sabina, my only question is, it looks like we're creating kind of an empty pocket here with the existing
Go back to
city
the slide
limits.
that you,
The aerial view, please. Well, this one will work here. There between 15 and 11, we've got a little void that we see these throughout the city in different areas, and they always seem to be a little sticky. And so I'm just kind of wondering why we're actually creating one. Seems like we would have the opportunity to include that little pocket as part of annexation now than try to do it later.
That is a good point. We actually have had some discussion just today about how we handle the quote-unquote donut holes.
Mm-hmm.
We currently have an annexation policy in place. That is something that we hope to have as we get through the comprehensive planning process, that we have some policies that that basically tell us how we would handle those kinds of holes.
Mm-hmm.
There's another one that's actually between 9 and 10 and 13 and 12.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now there is no policy that tells me, that gives me any direction to make a recommendation to you as far as that goes. From a sound planning practice standpoint, certainly we would recommend that donut holes be filled in for so that there's no confusion. Are you inside the city? Are you outside the city? And so that we don't have inefficiency of services. So you're not traveling outside of the city to come back into the city if you're in a city vehicle, if you're providing services.
is there some way we can move on this in some way to get this done today, or we have to have some kind of an ordinance or some language on this to manage this?
Well, my recommendation is that you roll that into your pending discussions with the comprehensive plan and the implementation of the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
That's definitely a bigger subject than is before you this evening, but it's a good one.
No one here representing the developer to ask the question why they left it?
Not this evening.
Or plans for future use or anything like that.
Not sure of the specifics of this little pocket that we're talking about, but we have talked to the developer about, instead of doing piece by piece with each preliminary plat, since we're nearing the end of the development agreement, actually talking with the developer about doing an annexation of the rest of the property to be developed as one piece, and then allow them to still come in phase by phase on their platting, but finish this up with hopefully just one more annexation. We can add these pockets to that discussion as well.
That's a good idea.
I mean, and I don't see a problem necessarily with, annexing block by block or neighborhood by neighborhood, but when we intentionally create one of these pockets that we constantly run into issues with in this commission, it just seems like we would do everything we could to avoid that. And maybe we have, just because there's not an ordinance right now that addresses it.
Right.
Okay. So it seems like this commission's hands are a little
Well,
tied.
should we allow staff to go back to the developer and talk this out a little bit more? Maybe they can replat this or clear this up now, or what's the problem with waiting a little bit longer?
Staff recommends approval, so that you guys do not see that open areas that are
Not at this time.
as an
Well,
issue.
and remember too, we're under the development agreement, which
Right.
basically allows them to come in as they're ready. So we have had many annexations that probably left several areas like this in the past, and I think in theory, in the end, it all comes together.
Uh-huh. Well, this is all inside one development. That's the good part about it. And it's property owned by the developer, not to be used for anything else, so. But I agree, I think.
Right. We'll add that to the discussion with the developer to make sure we can include these couple donut holes we have with our kind of next annexation phase. Kind of wrap the whole project up.
I don't have any issue with it.
That's okay.
All right, well, any further discussion? Do I hear a motion?
I would make a motion that we approve the annexation as presented.
Do you want to include any discussion on addressing donut holes in the future?
I guess we can. I mean, Drew says they're already in conversation with them about that, so I don't know if we need to give staff direction in this particular annexation proposal. I can. It doesn't, I mean,
Well, with the understanding that it's a plan to get this development completely wrapped up in maybe one more action. Is that correct?
We can certainly bring that up with a developer as we move through and decide whether the annexation agreement would actually expire in January of 2019. So as we have discussions of whether we even need to continue with another development agreement, we can add that
Okay.
to the discussion.
okay,
That should be added, I believe.
so added.
The whole
Okay.
purpose for the development agreement was understanding that this would come in piece by piece, but that we needed to have an overall comprehensive approach to the development, to the logical development of this property, and so that certainly fits in with that discussion.
All right. So we have a motion to approve the annexation. Have a second?
I second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. Item 3B is a public hearing and action on a recommendation to City Council on a text amendment. Sabina, could you give us an update on this, please?
Yes, certainly. This item comes before you as part two, if you will, of a discussion that you had at the end of a rezoning request that came before you a couple of months ago. That rezoning did go on to the City Council and was denied. That the request was specifically for a parking lot for a certain piece of property, but we had a larger discussion about whether or not parking lots in general should be always have to be on the same site and would always have to be under the same exact zoning classification as the use that they're serving, and if there was a different scenario, there currently is no place in the zoning code that would allow for that kind of a request to even be requested and come forward anywhere. So as a part of that, at the end of that discussion, we talked about possibly putting that tool as a possible tool in the zoning code. So the item that's before you is an amendment, and you did discuss one about a month ago, where we brought an item forward that was fairly simple, where a conditional use permit could be requested anywhere in any zoning district throughout the city. What I recall from the discussion is that there was not a real across-the-board level of comfort with that type of a setup, and what you asked us to do was go back and look at each specific zoning classification in our zoning ordinance and make some recommendations. And that's what we did have to re-advertise in the newspaper because the nature of the amendment had, or the verbiage in the sections that were affected had changed quite a bit. In fact, expanded quite a bit, because we're looking at each specific zoning district. Because of that, it looks more complicated, but basically what this does, and what I did in the staff report for you, was to, within those almost 40 zoning districts that we have, and as you know, the city's split into north, south, east, west, and the central, or CBD, zoning districts. Within each, there are specific little character areas that are identified, and each one has its own list of uses that are either permitted by right, so no additional review of those uses that are permitted by right, conditional uses, so a use that could be permitted under specific conditions, or it could be denied, actually, and we've seen a couple like that as well. Or then not permitted at all, so a blank space in the zoning table. So what I did in your staff report was I reminded you of what is in the zoning ordinance, the purpose statement behind each of those, behind each of the sub-districts, if you will. And then the draft ordinance that legal has drafted, the first draft to bring forward, is essentially what I sent in to be very specific within each zoning classification as to where these uses would be potentially permitted by right if this amendment passes the way that it's written. The areas where they would be a conditional use, so this commission and the city council would see those uses and decide whether that specific area, that specific site should be a parking lot or a parking garage. So that's the first thing that I would point out is in thinking through this a little bit further and thinking where we may be receiving these kinds of requests, certainly within downtown, for example, what would we do? What would I do if somebody came into my office with a parking garage? Right now, I have nothing, unless if they supported a site or a use and it was on the same site. Really do not have anything that would tell them that they could not do that. On a different site, however, right now, there's nothing in the ordinance that even gives us the tool at all to move something like that forward if it's on its own separate site. Our parking garage here being a good example of that. So then going back to your actual staff report, starting on page 12, so going to the west side. So going to the west side, and I've zoomed in a little bit, and this is also a map that is in your hard copy that was mailed to you. So basically, the west side is mostly your commercial and light industrial type of uses. And as you see, they're numbered 1 through 10. The ones where I have recommended the conditional use for a parking lot, so a surface parking lot or a parking garage, would be in the W7 and in the W8. I'm not going to read the purpose statement to you there, but they are listed in the staff report beginning on page 13. So reading through the district and then also looking back at the map for the W7 and the W8, a little more sensitive areas closer to the river. And I would imagine that even though it is a process, having to have 2 public hearings and having to come show your plans to the Planning and Zoning Commission and to the City Council is certainly more expensive and more time consuming for development of a piece of property. However, for these areas, they would likely rise to the level where you would want to have more scrutiny and not just allow these standalone sites by right. So that would be the W7 and the W8 listed specifically as conditional uses. And then moving on to the central business district, or the C districts. And remember that the downtown core is a sub-district within the CBD. So that is on page 19. We can also pop that up here. In the red is the CBD, and then the darker red, or the almost brown, is the downtown core. Both of those have the same or similar restrictions. The downtown core gets more specific into uses that would be listed by right, and that's why there are actually two tables in the draft that legal has put forth. Well, I'm sorry, so it would be, if you look on, so page 19 has the actual map. The pages before, beginning on 16, the central city has all of the sub-districts there and those purpose statements as well. So going back to the top of the page 3 of the ordinance, where it has the zoning districts 11 through 20. It's showing that in the central business district and in the downtown core, then these uses would be permitted by right, even if they are not on the site that they are serving. If they're on the same site that they are serving, then they're just considered part of that primary use and would not have any additional review other than the development site plan. And going.
Sabina, before we leave that group, District 13C, it refers to low intensity, non-residential uses, and also the Guadalupe River, so that one I flagged as a conditional.
Okay.
Well, and honestly, I mean, ultimately, will the commission be going section by section, table by table, adjusting this draft document? Or do we have the
You can.
time? Okay.
You can. The item is on your agenda tonight for possible action, but it doesn't, there is nothing to hold you to that time.
Okay. All right.
We just got the list, so.
Yeah, so.
Right.
I think we'll need more time to adjust, but I mean, continue, please.
In other words, that is on the last slide too. If you decide to table the item, there is no time restriction to that we're up against.
Okay.
So we're gonna need to go through each section to see if it,
I think at some point, I think we should.
So what we're
Not-
talking
not
about is going
necessarily
through each section to determine if it would be suitable for the possibility of a conditional use permit for parking.
Right.
Is that what we're saying?
Right.
Or permitted.
what she's saying is she's currently, some of these will be permitted, it will be a right that we will not review under the development.
And that's
under
just
this-
a suggestion. Yes.
And yet, that's what you've done as you've worked through each of these districts. You have said these are areas that people should have rights to do whatever they, within the regular ordinance as it stands
standalone
today.
That is
So
a
that's what this has done
recommendation.
here?
So the only ones we probably should deal with, those are not changing. It's only the ones that we want to change to conditional use that we need to, are they all changing?
They're all changing because today we do not have a classification for a standalone surface parking lot at all.
In any district?
Correct. If you have a commercial site and you've built or you have an existing site that where you have parking that at some point met the parking regulation, and you choose as a property owner to add additional parking on a site that isn't part of the same site, we do not have that is not a permitted use right now at all.
So it's not allowed?
It's not allowed unless it becomes part of the same site.
Okay, so what if you have a tear down and a redo? What happens there in that circumstance?
If it's on the existing site, let's say Walmart wanted to redevelop and tear down and put in.
Well, let's pick this area, the sensitive area that you're talking about. It's downtown is really where this is what we're talking about now, correct? 13C, isn't that the downtown district? 13C?
Yes.
So let's take 13C.
Yes.
If you have a tear down in 13C, then you will have the right to do whatever you want to do within that space.
As long as it meets.
Which meets the current ordinances as drafted here. Is that correct?
It's not.
Yes.
It's if you have a property in that area and you tear the building down and you're going to build a new building with parking, that's not what we're talking about.
Correct.
We're only talking about if you decided to make that property just a parking lot.
Exactly.
Okay. See the difference?
So what? Yes, but so what would happen? They could not.
Right now, I would tell that person that it is not a permitted use standing by itself.
Just a parking lot.
Okay, so that's what you've
Anywhere
done with
in-
this language here is protected that from happening, creating a parking lot in the downtown district.
Correct.
What we're going to be doing, probably not tonight, but at some point, go through each one of these sections and say, okay, yes, we agree. We think that this should be a conditional use.
Possibility.
Or yes, we
use.
think that this should not be allowed, period. Or we think that it should be allowed by right.
Well,
But I think as a commission, we need to go,
but I think the staff has done some of that based on a principle. Is what you've approached this district by district and outlined under a principle that's what you want to happen here is maintain continuity of that area, is what I'm assuming is what you've done here.
Yes, sir.
You made a judgment about how you want to apply the ordinance in that particular area at this point. Because you've gone through every district and written the language that you want to apply to that district as you see it. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Based on a principle.
That's a
I mean,
good
that's what
summary.
we should be working on, is the principle of what we're trying to accomplish here. Uniformity, consistency, fairness.
Yes. And
Okay.
largely what I did was I went through and I looked at the commercial districts and put those as permitted by right, unless it's a commercial district that has some sensitivity to it. It's by the river, it is close to residential, or some other reason why you might want to see it and require a separate process with public hearings and a resolution at the end.
Well, that goes back to what we've started this with, is this residential transition areas where we've kind of moved in and out of whether it's residential, and that's how we're getting there. Is there certain areas that we ought to have a chance to review and look at what we're trying to accomplish long-term in a specific area?
Well, I agree, but I think what took this out of our making any decisions on this before, when Rustin brought up that he thinks we ought to go through and eliminate all residential areas from having the possibility of having a conditional use permit. Is that not what you had suggested?
Right, in residential.
In residential areas. So have we done that? Have you done that in this? Are we down now to just?
Not the exact same way, I don't think.
We're almost there. Well, so very similar on the east side. I'll just go through that really quickly. There are just a couple, again, because the east side is, right, let me get there really quickly here. So the east side, those are the 30 districts.
East side's page 23.
What is it here?
Well, not the map. The map is on
No, I see
page
it.
25.
Yes.
North side, south side.
23 is east side.
Yeah, see, I'm
And the
looking
east
for the
starts
east side
with
in this
25.
draft.
Oh, no, in this piece.
I'm looking at this in this
Oh,
draft
right
thing
there.
here.
I'm
I don't
looking-
see the east side.
Section 6.
Okay, the east side here.
Okay, Sabina?
Okay, so starting on the east side, starting with sub-district 25, so you'll see 31 and 32 recommended for conditional use permit. I'm sorry, in 28.
31 and 32.
31 and 32 with
And 28.
for parking structures conditional.
Right.
So the P is for
Separated
parking
those out.
structure and the C is for,
Conditional use would be a parking structure. The parking lot would be permitted by right on 28E.
Right, and that's just to point that out, to kind of show you how this is, how I thought through this. And then but most of those districts that I just went through, including then the north and the south, are largely commercial. Where you get to the residential, the R1, down at the bottom of
Yeah.
the ordinance on page 3, and then beginning in the staff report, and that's where the map is much more zoomed out.
Mm-hmm.
Let me-
residential zone.
Becomes harder to see. It's easier to see online.
Districts.
And also the miscellaneous districts, because they span across the city as well. So starting on page 28 in the staff report,
Mhm.
and then at the bottom of page 3 on the ordinance,
Mhm.
the draft, I should say. So where there is a blank, it would not be permitted. So that's getting to Commissioner Zuber's
Mhm.
intent there. The recommendation would be for the R3, which is a multifamily district, allows apartments and condominiums, for there to be a conditional use, and again, for those to come back through the commission and the council for possible, for decision, either approval or denial, or approval with conditions. And in the RT district, then listing the standalone, so that's where we would get to the site, possibly, that was the impetus for all of this discussion.
It's conditional,
As a conditional, yes.
but not a
We do not
parking,
have
no parking structure opportunity there.
correct, because the height restriction in the
Right.
RT.
No, I'm not disagreeing, I'm just making what it says.
Yeah.
And that's what I was envisioning there, exactly what you did there. I guess one question would be the conditions. There aren't any stated conditions, right? So the conditions would be whatever
There could be.
the board.
There could be.
Okay.
What's before you right now, the way it's written right now, there aren't any standard conditions.
Okay.
We do have other conditional uses in the zoning ordinance where that automatically sort of apply, and then anything over and above that, the Planning and Zoning Commission can recommend and the City Council can
You're
approve
saying
additional conditions.
for a parking lot where there's automatic conditions that apply? Is that what you just said?
There could be. The way this is written, there aren't right now.
And I guess where my thoughts are on the RT, the conditions are that it should meet the intended purpose of that zone. And I don't know if you state that or can, but that's what I think the condition should be.
That it's supporting a use that's permitted in that zoning district.
Or it meets the intent of the zone. The RT has a specific intent,
Yes, it does.
and so that, to me, that condition should be that it meets the intent of that zone. Really, that would go for all of them.
Well, recall the intent of the RT
Yeah, that's gotta
district
be-
is to have a house, or is to have a business that looks like a house, that looks like a residence.
Right.
So a standalone parking lot, I think automatically would have a tough time meeting
Yeah.
the intent statement.
Well, then
of that.
you're violating the intent of the zone. Right, I mean, that's, you know,
Right.
if the intent is for it to look like a residence, then the parking lot would need to look like a residence.
What does a residence look like?
Usually
Well,
doesn't have a
a
parking
wood-
lot.
I was about to say, not covered with asphalt.
Well,
If it-
then if it's impossible, then it shouldn't be a conditional use. I mean.
And that's up to this
Okay.
commission to,
Alright.
to,
To look at it.
But it could be
consider,
behind a
yes.
house. I mean, I'm not, seems like there could be some leeway there. But,
Yeah, but if the house is not a business, then it doesn't meet the use of residential transitional to have a business that looks like a house.
If you look over,
If you have a house and you just say, I'm gonna put a parking lot behind the house for some other purpose, then that doesn't meet the requirements of a residential transitional zoning.
I think it would be a hard argument to make.
I'm not sure I thought when we started the process, we were looking at a way to have this as a conditional use permit, subject to specific conditions set by the zoning, the P and Z, for that conditional use permit for that parking lot.
we would review the plans.
Right.
And look at the shrubbery, look at the site.
Access.
Look at the site, access,
Yes.
egress, and all those factors. I mean, if you look at some of the parking lots that sort of extend down towards the Baptist church parking lot, you can see that that's been landscaped and set up, but it's a parking lot that's way inside a residential area. It's beyond the residential transition area, but it probably was at one time.
It
Some of
may-
these
it
parking
may-
lots.
It may have been, I don't
It
know.
may have been grandfathered, but it looks brand new. I
It
mean,
does.
But I think what we're doing is once we start stepping into that area, is we need to address all of it. You know, once we start saying, okay, well, we want to be able to create a conditional use in an RT zone for a parking lot, then the first thing you say, well, what about the other zones? And so I think that's, you know, once we open that door, we gotta go
Well, that's
all
why
in.
you blocked out some of these zones.
Right, and
Yeah.
so, you know, I think the thing is to address all of it, and that's something that we can't do in one night, in an hour, I don't think. I think this is gonna take a little bit more discussion and review, but I do think that, you know, this is how we address it. And,
Well, they've taken our language and she's drafted into the first draft here. That's what's happened here.
So,
Yeah.
in a theoretical sense, if in some fashion this was to be approved, and I own a property over, in any residential transitional, theoretically, I could build a parking lot there. And it would be up to the conditions that the planning and zoning put on it, but I could, you know, rent parking. Is
yeah,
it-
that's correct.
Yep.
Mhm.
If this or a similar ordinance gets passed,
Mhm.
then an applicant could come in any of these districts where it's listed as a C, submitted a plan, and the plan would come to this commission, and you can place either already written standards or additional standards that would, that you feel would mitigate any negative impacts to the surrounding neighborhood, could. But that specific application would have to come in first.
Mhm.
Tonight is really more of a discussion of creating the tool in the ordinance, but not yet applying it anywhere. But in the future, if this or a similar ordinance is approved, then a plan would come forward, and you could require additional screening. You could restrict access. You could require landscaping where today we don't require
You could
any.
reduce the size.
You could reduce the
They'd have to
size.
justify the size. If they wanted 20 spaces, we could say, what do you need 20 for? You only need
Well,
10.
I think how we've gotten to this point right here, and just to take this specific case, and a lot of people are here from the neighborhood, we were trying to limit the impact that this would have on the neighborhood, and if we get to a point where we allow parking lots in a residential transitional area and someone starts renting out parking and you got 50 cars a day coming in and out from that street, then I think we've kind of defeated what we're trying to avoid.
Right. And so that's why, you know, at some point we'll decide whether that RT gets a permitted by right, permitted by condition, or not permitted at all.
Yeah.
Those are the
And
three
which,
choices.
which right now we don't have.
Right.
And
I was looking for an avenue when we started this process, and I'm just going to use the case we have here for Mr. Motherall, who has a business on Sidney Baker, owns the property behind it, and is looking for some relief from his parking. The possibility of allowing him a conditional use to use part of that parking, part of that lot for parking, only accessible from his property in front, fully screened, where there was no traffic impact on Clay Street, and there was no visibility of the cars parking in there. That was kind of my,
would that be a condition that we would apply to the
That is certainly
conditional use?
something that you could apply. Just right now, you don't have the tool in the ordinance, in the
Good.
zoning
Another first
ordinance to
step.
get you there.
Yeah.
Right, this is sort of a baby step, the first step that needs to happen is to create the tool.
okay.
And then
we
to
can-
get to
The practicality of
specific
it.
site. The
That's
specific
what
site
you're
isn't
how do
before you this
apply it?
evening.
That's the
And I'm
question. How
pretty
do
sure that's what they're all here to.
Yeah, so I still have a public meeting that I gotta
Yes, sir.
to open up here.
Mr. Harmon, if I may.
Yes.
As Samina was kind of pointing out, there's different avenues we can take to get to those conditions. What we have before you is just the, where is it permitted, where is it conditional,
Okay.
but no framework for conditions. The commission would look at each project case by case and throw conditions at it as the commission sees fit.
As it
We
applies.
could set a framework for conditions, so part of your conditional use is we want to look at a parking lot, where's the access, where's your screening, and how does it, photographs of the adjacent area so that you can see all
How
of
does
that.
it impact the real area?
Yeah, how
Right.
does the traffic impact the neighborhood?
And so you can require that information as part of the conditional use application. Or we could take it the next level, and as a minimum, you have a standard setback, a standard screening, a standard access recommendation or requirement. And then anything above and beyond to protect case by case could still be applied. So you kind of have three levels we can start with.
I'm gonna surmise, or I'm gonna guess, that anyone that comes and looks for a conditional use permit to put a parking lot in a residential transitional area, the neighborhood is gonna say, we don't want the traffic. That's the first thing we're gonna have to deal with, I think, is, we're not looking for cars coming in and out next door parking, coming in and out all the time. I think that's what we're gonna look at.
And in some cases, it may not have an impact on a neighborhood street there, and Mr. Motherall's is one example. There is access from his adjacent property and not have to access from Clay
Well,
Street.
that's the easiest way, that's
Right.
the easiest thing we're gonna get.
And
that
other
way.
examples, maybe a corner lot, so we limit it to one street closer to a major street. And it all needs to be looked at case by
Yeah.
case. I don't think there's a set of conditions we can get that
No,
one
because
size
if you
fits
look
all.
at where some of the other RT areas are, like Earl Garrett,
Mhm.
there's street parking available there.
Yeah.
So access
So
to
it
Earl
lays a
Garrett
different
may not be-
And
situation.
it's also way more
There's
commercial.
not really street parking on Clay like there is on Earl Garrett.
Right.
So every area has,
Business is not on Clyde.
Right.
I just wanted to introduce those three different kind of levels before we go to the public hearing.
At 5:15, I'm going to open the public hearing. I do have some speaker request forms. I don't know what order they came in, but Ms. Mary Lee Stewart had a request. Please state your name and address for the record.
I am Mary Lee Stewart, and I live at 600 Murder Street.
Okay, thank you.
And I've appeared before y'all before. So I'm here to oppose the action concerning this text amendment, adding conditional use regulations for parking lots. This situation opens the way for Mr. Motherall to apply for a parking lot behind his shopping center on Sidney Baker. why should the people on Clay Street have to pay for mistakes that are made on Sidney Baker? This is a residential area. It's been used for light commercial stuff too, but it's strictly, I've lived there since 1940, and it's been a residential area this entire time. Mr. Motherall already has the home and the garage apartment at 829 Clay, prepared to move from the lot. And they've been raised off of the foundation and they're ready to go, apparently as soon as it's legal. Opening this up will make the 800 block of Clay Street much more opened to becoming business-like. At a recent city council meeting, Mr. Baruti talked about how once a hole is punched in the Clay Street versus Sidney Baker wall, invisible wall, it will open the way for this small area to become just as commercial as Sidney Baker. And it doesn't have to be. That parking lot would be less than 200 feet from my property. And shouldn't the city protect me, who I'm in an R1 zone? And I don't see why I have to live with the parking lot with its trash, varmints, dumpsters, and so on. It's just unbelievable. This has been very satisfactory as an RT zone, and I shouldn't have to fight this. I'm tired of coming down here, if you want to know the truth. Kerrville 2050, I believe, is supposed to be finalized or whatever they're going to do with it in June. So this is a big rush deal from the Smoking Dragon restaurant to Clay Street to try to get this under the line before it's over and done with. And I hate to see a sacrifice of small in-town neighborhood just because one person's in a hurry. They used to have wagon yards for these things. So, but we didn't put them in the residential areas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. I also have a speaker request form from Ayala.
Yeah, do you want to object?
Yes.
Come on up here. Julie Reeves asked somebody to speak for her, but I had her letter and I left it at home. So I just registered that Julie Reeves, who's Ramona's daughter, wanted to.
Okay.
I'm Teresa Ayala. I live right in the corner of Clay and Burnett.
Could you get a little closer to the microphone just so we be sure that we get you
Pull
on
it
there?
down.
They're tall.
Yeah, pull it down. It's okay.
Oh.
It's okay.
Careful.
Here, I'll fix it for you.
There you go.
And I wouldn't want, like someone came by the house not too long ago, that they wanted to make a parking lot or let's see, what's it?
Driveway. You told me
Yeah,
driveway.
coming from Clay Street and go around and then come to Quinlan Street and all of that streets. And I wouldn't want that to come, you know, the traffic to be behind our garage or our yard. But I don't know who to tell anything because I don't believe that nobody would do that.
That was Eloise Rempschel's
Yes.
alley from his place, which is where those apartments
are.
down at Barnett.
And
They're trying to make it a driveway,
Yes.
apparently.
they was thinking on making a road from Clay Street, or what is it, Clay?
Yeah.
And then go around to the other street and come right close to our yard.
Okay.
And I
Thank
don't
you.
think that would be right,
Okay.
because
All
we are a family and we like to sit outside and enjoy the view and but they are coming, they have traffic all around us.
Okay.
And they come by and they throw trash and all of that. And I wouldn't want for the owner of the person that wants to do that, you know, make a road on Clay Street and go around and come up behind our yard, or anyway, the other. And I wouldn't want that every night we have to be in the lookout for what they're gonna throw out or what they're gonna do. So I wish somebody would do something.
Okay,
Thank you,
Because
ma'am.
we wouldn't want that road to be built.
no, I understand. Thank you.
No.
All right. I also have a speaker request form from Larry Eskridge.
Larry Eskridge, 1000 Ramshall. I've been here before, and I'm speaking not only for myself, but for Wayne Franklin. He's out of he's in Hawaii right now. He won't be back until about the 11th, and he was concerned about this. I think he sent something in
He
from
did.
his iPhone. Okay. Some of what I heard today is very positive. I would like to see this continue with specific restrictions and possibilities, and I think Mr. Seigerman mentioned some of those. Senior moment, I'm sorry.
That's right.
And I hope that this, once it's done, does fit into the Kerrville 2050 plan, and that this isn't a backdoor approach to sliding something in. The things that were expressed today about concern for traffic, for trash, lighting, noise, and all these things that would affect the contiguous houses in that neighborhood, that would be unsatisfactory and be unfortunate for these ladies. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Do we have anyone else who would like to speak at the public hearing? Yes, sir. Please state your name and address.
Sure. Excuse me. Name is David Lipscomb. I live at 909 Lake, Kerrville. A residential parking lot, in my view, is a void in an urban setting, and unfortunately one of the most visible elements in the streetscape. Adding to that, parking lots can have an impact both on the neighborhood and the environment. Therefore, parking lots, I believe, need guidance to become good neighbors. I request that the following be considered for code implementation for parking lots should they be approved for residential districts. 1, screening, as you mentioned before, requires screening along the street in front of residential parking lots. Plants should screen adequately but allow autos to exit with full view of sidewalk and/or street. Buffers, a buffer of plants to extend along all the edges of the residential parking lot when a parking lot meets the residential lot line. To provide a continuous screen landscape buffer of 6 feet in width and 6 feet in height. Interior parking lot landscaping. Provide additional landscaping within the interior of the parking area. Landscape to cover some percentage of the lot, say 10% or more, including walkways, parking spaces, driveways. Plant installation and maintenance. The plants should be of a size adequate to screen at the time of planting. Plants must be cared for to ensure their survival. And plants that don't survive should be replaced to maintain the landscape. Plant selection, of course, should be from a city's approved list or from materials selected by a landscape architect and approved. ADA and compact parking places. Handicap spaces provided in accordance with federal regs. Size and numbers of such spaces should be in agreement with city, of course, and located as close as possible to building entrances. Lighting certainly should be mounted to illuminate the parking lot throughout the night and evening, but comply with city codes regarding to the lighting levels. And the lights should certainly be focused to prevent glare on surrounding properties. Stormwater. Owners of parking lots should implement a plan to manage the stormwaters within the lines of the property. plans would ensure that each parking lot includes a catch basin and drainage to accommodate the runoff. Special consideration might even be required on larger lots or areas with environmental restrictions. Trash containers, mentioned before. When parking lots also are sites for trash collection containers, those sites must be screened on all sides with solid materials at a height to block the view of the trash container. Parking lots adjacent to residential properties should have those trash container screens located away from the adjacent properties to reduce noise during collection. Maintain clean space. Owners should be responsible for cleaning parking lots on a regular basis to ensure not only an attractive scene, but one that does not encourage rodent feeding. And kind of an exception I'll throw out to landscape. Landscaping should be required around parking lots in residential districts. However, walls or estate fencing could be appropriate in certain zoning areas. While the construction might be an additional expense, over time those costs could be significantly reduced for maintenance. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Lipscomb.
Lipscomb. Do I have any other persons wanting to speak in the open meeting? All right, at 5:27, I'm going to close the open meeting. I'd just like to thank everyone for their comments. I want to speak on behalf of the commission in that we take those comments very seriously. We have the same concerns that you do, and what we are trying to do is find a balance that we can meet the needs of a growing community, also meet the needs of the citizens that live in that community, and find a balance. Right now, what we're looking at is parking lots that we haven't really addressed in our ordinances yet. And so what we're trying to do is establish the rules. And so this is kind of like Sabine said, the first step, the baby step in establishing that. But I do want to assure you that this commission does have your interests in mind, because I don't believe any of us up here would like to have a parking lot put next door to us either. And so there are some areas in the city where it might be okay. There are some areas in the city where it wouldn't be okay at all. And so what we're trying to do is just find a way to determine where those areas are and what fits best for the city. So thank you for your comments. We appreciate that. Commissioners, you have questions in addition to what we've already discussed? I mean, personally, I think that this is a good start. I like the format, the layout. I think it reads well.
Mm-hmm.
I think, personally, there are some areas that are addressed as permitted outright that I disagree with, but I think probably every one of us up here has our own interpretation of what is acceptable and what isn't, and I think it's just going to take a little time for us to go through that. And
What would that process look like?
that's a question that I would have for Drew or Sabine. What would be the best way for this commission to come together in looking at these individual zoning sections? Is that something that is handled in a regular meeting? Is that something that's handled in a workshop? And it may even come down to a legal issue, Mike, on how we can and can't discuss these particular zoning districts.
I'm probably Sabina, I'm probably 80 or 90% I'm liking, but I have some differences.
Sure, and certainly for tonight, one of your options is to table for the purposes of further discussion, and I would recommend then that you place it on workshop for a future, so that we're not constantly having to put ads in the paper, so we have discussion and at this level, and then once an amendment once that amendment is actually drafted to a point where you feel that it's ready to proceed. You did that similar with a home occupation. You discussed it in workshops several times before you said proceed and place an ad in the paper and
I agree, and
have a
I actually
public hearing.
think that a workshop is a good idea with you guys, Drew or you or both. So as we go through this, we can get your opinion or what your thoughts are and guide us. I mean, we have an idea what we think, but to have
And
you
their
guys,
their experience too.
yeah.
So
Mike, is there an issue on that with,
You just need to post it.
That's
the
it.
issue there.
Public meeting.
So we can post it as a workshop, go through the details, roll our sleeves up and draft something out. Then schedule it for a follow-up public hearing.
I think there's some comments been made from the audience. I think it ought to be addressed is this 2050 is not really going to dig into the detail that we're going to dig into. We're going to apply what 2050 is looking at 30,000 feet. We're trying to apply it into the real world. And for me personally, each of these districts needs to be we need to kind of look at what that district looks like today in its own section, one at a time. But there's also the flow of the whole thing. So it's going to take a workshop. I agree with the workshop idea. And I think we're right. We're probably 90% of this is pretty much, you're right on track. It's those exceptions we probably need to deal with.
I think 2050 is the concept of what we're all talking about with 2050 is they have a strong recommendation to maintain downtown residential areas to keep the character of the city. I think that's what they're doing. And from my perspective, I think what our responsibility is to protect the interest of the people that is first and foremost that live in the areas that are going to be affected. To look if something that can be done, and in difference to Bruce's project, I understand what he's trying to do, and I would hope there was a way we could work it out, but I really do think that, I mean, we need to
But
go
it's
through
going to
this.
change.
Yeah.
2050 is a different Kerrville than today.
Oh, yeah, I'm not talking about 2050. I'm talking about what we're doing today with conditional use permits and things like that. We really need to focus on protecting the areas that we're dealing with that are asked to be changed.
I think what conditional use permits allow us to do is to manage change specifically.
Yeah.
That's what it allows us to do.
All right. So do I hear a motion on how we should proceed?
I'll make a motion to have the workshop on this district by district.
And we
Okay.
table.
And table any action
Table
tonight.
any action today until we have the
I'll
workshop.
second that.
All right. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise right hand. Motion carries 5-0. Next item is item 4. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Item 4, public hearing and final action. Item 4A, public hearing and action on replat. I believe this is regarding the Meridian.
That's correct.
Okay. Drew, could you give us some background on this?
Yes, it does require a public hearing because it is just a replat. I do apologize for the confusion at our last meeting. Because it is only a portion of the subdivision, we cannot vacate the plat. To vacate it would vacate the entire subdivision. Since we already have houses built and lots sold, we obviously can't do that. So we are looking at replatting a portion of it. We're removing 12 lots? Yes. 12 lots along that northern edge of the property, ending the street system at that northern edge. I've worked with the fire marshal's department, or fire marshal and fire department on the third emergency access point. I've come to resolution on that. Staff recommends it.
Where is that point?
Let's see if I can get this. That is,
Oh, right there.
wow, this is pretty quick. Right about there.
Okay.
So it'll go down the hill from right about here. Whoops. It'll go from right about here down to West Crest to the northeast.
So would that be set as an easement on this new
Yes.
plat?
It's an easement.
It's an easement. It is not part of the,
There's no gate there.
street
Is there a
system.
gate there or something?
there is.
Yeah.
It'll be a manual gate. It will not have public access. It'll be emergency access only. And they, like I said, worked through with city engineer and fire marshal's office to get that design approved. We do have a lift station and easements in place for that, for their sewer system.
What were our other questions last time? Do we have other questions other than the emergency access? I don't,
That was really the last piece of it that we were looking at. Other than that, with the 1999 resolution, we have the 3 access points, the third being, actually 2 of them being emergency access only. One is manual, one is electric, and then the resident gate is the main entrance to the subdivision. Is there anything else that I'm missing, Mr. Vogel? Okay. Again, because it is a replat, it does require a public hearing, but staff recommends approval as presented.
All right, thank you. All right, at this time, at 5:36, keep hearing. Anyone in the audience want to come forward and speak on it? Nobody coming forward. We'll close the public hearing at 5:37. Commissioners, have any questions or concerns?
Been no opposition or no concern about the replat, correct, from the area?
No, we have not heard, staff has not heard from any of the residents. I believe Mr. Seafelt have a meeting with the homeowners association or not?
I'm not aware of that group.
Okay. I know they talked about possibly having a homeowners meeting. I don't know if that occurred or not. Staff was not made aware. But again, we didn't hear from anybody with concerns, so.
Was Meridian planned as a development district, or is it just a general residential zone?
It's RC.
Okay, residential cluster, all right.
Yes.
Okay. And so this new plat maintains that zoning?
That's correct. Okay. There's no change in zoning. Again, it meets all the criteria of the development agreement. So it's just the elimination of those final lots that they decided not to build. Any other questions?
Commissioners, any concerns?
No.
Thoughts? Entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion, we accept the replat as presented.
I'll second.
I'll second.
All right, got a motion and a second to accept the replat as presented. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 5-0. Item number 5 on the agenda is a staff report.
Two things. We do have on our April 19th meeting, we will also have an open house for the comprehensive plan. So it'll likely be a very longer meeting and a very busy meeting. We're going to give a presentation on the future land use plan from Kerrville 2050 and the thoroughfare plan. We'll have part of the consultant team here to give some presentation. The board does have one other item on the agenda. So we'll have a lot of the maps set up out in the lobby for folks to look at and review, kind of go through our normal business and then open the open house / workshop for you to hear any comments, let the public hear the presentation from the consultant. No, it's not an action item, just a preliminary precursory review before we get to the end of our process. Obviously, you'll see it on the steering committee as well, so you'll get to see it twice. Following that, on the 20th, we're going to have another open house focusing more on the thoroughfare plan and invite some property owners that may or may not be affected by the thoroughfare plan. For any future thoroughfares and collectors that are in the plan, want to make sure we hear from those property owners so that they have their chance to give their feedback.
So is that April 20th meeting a special meeting for planning and zoning, or is that
It's not actually a planning commission meeting, it's just going to be a city staff open house, I think is how we're looking at.
that's just the
hosting it.
thoroughfare meeting.
It'll be the thoroughfare and the land use plan.
Oh, the land.
Also,
Both.
but since there's no action item, it'll be more or less like what we had at the Dietert Center, just some feedback and community input. Or are we posting it as a steering committee? Sorry, Mike, looking at you.
You're looking at me?
Then we've gone back and forth.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay, we're still trying to figure out exactly how it's posted.
So our next meeting is our next P&Z meeting is April the 19th.
Yes.
Just an alert.
Is the 20th meeting similar to the 19th?
Yes.
Okay.
It
So
should
we,
be, the only difference is we are inviting the specific property owners for the 20th to focus more on the thoroughfare plan, but we're going to review both of them at both meetings.
But the 19th is, we're gonna have a regular meeting.
Regular meeting and then the open house
Right.
added to that.
Is the 20th at 4:30 also?
20th is at 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock.
Moving it up since it's Friday. Right. And the 19th at 4 o'clock, we're inviting the public to basically to the lobby space with the maps. The meeting for the commission will still start at 4:30. Also on April 20th, you guys have an opportunity if you choose to accept it.
Mission Impossible.
Yes.
You're too young to know that.
ACOG, Alamo Area Council of Governments, is presenting a planning and zoning workshop for commissioners and elected officials. It is in San Antonio. It's free, but we do need to have anyone that's interested signed up by, I believe it is the 16th. So if you have any interest in going to that training, that workshop, we'd be happy to get you signed up. Unfortunately, Sabina and I, nor I, can attend with you. So we'll be here working on the other, open house. So just wanted to put that out there that you have that opportunity. If you choose to, just let us know and we'll get you signed up and go from there.
You can sign me up.
Okay.
I'll go down there.
Don, I'll let you be my representative.
I'll represent all you guys.
I gotta look at my calendar. I don't
Real
know.
good chance of it.
I just don't know.
And that's all I have to say. Mike, anything? Tyler?
All right, thank you.
Oh, yes, Monday is comp plan steering committee meeting, 3 to 6 at Peterson Hospital. They've got a
Got the
conference
email
room
already.
on the second floor somewhere, so follow the crowd.
All right. Okay, commissioners, anything else? Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
A motion? Do I have a second? Second. Motion and second to adjourn. All in favor, raise your right hand. We are adjourned at 5:43.